Hello, everyone. Welcome to Being Patient Live Talks. I'm Mark New, host at Being Patient. Today, we have a special guest who has literally gone the full distance in challenging the limits of human potential in both body, mind, and spirit. He's an engineer who's worked on stealth fighter jets, a former go-karting racing champion. We got to find out more about that. And that's not even the hardest stuff. He's now run three full Ironmans and 10 half Ironmans. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 56 years old, but is still competing, training, and inspiring. Scott Berkheiser joins us with his wife, Kris, from Venice, Florida. Thank you both for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
First of all, for amateur athletes out there, tell me what completing an Ironman encompasses.
Okay, so you start off with a 2.4 mile swim, a 112 mile bike ride, and then a 26.2 run.
Okay, you say that very matter-of-factly, but as we hear that, we kind of gasp. So just to let you know that.
That's what I did the first time. I worked with a guy who did it. And when he was telling me that, I had the same reaction. I gasped. I'm like, why would anybody want to do that? And one thing led to another.
And one thing led to another, and then you went on to do how many?
I've done three full distance Ironmans and 10 half Ironman distances.
Okay. And tell me, it was about 2 years ago when you were diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and how does it come about? I mean, you were continuing training, I imagine, and then,
Yes.
what were the symptoms?
Um, my brain was always my biggest asset in my career and everything else and it was my memory recall was really good. Um, I wasn't the smartest person, but my memory recall and logical thinking was really good. And I noticed it starts to slip a little bit. And I mentioned it to our primary care doctor, and, they didn't really, just after I said it a couple appointments, they said, well, maybe we should send you to the neurologist and get checked. Um, and at that point, I don't really think other people were noticing it except me, that I was realizing things that I should have remembered or, weren't a problem anymore. I was starting to struggle with a little bit. Um, so went to the neurologist, did a bunch of tests, basically diagnosed me with ADD, which I mean, I was just was speechless that was the answer. Um, so I kind of just shrugged my shoulders and moved on. And then maybe, I don't know, 18 months, 2 years later, I mean, I still noticed it. But then coworkers were starting to notice it too. People, we'd be doing something and I would say something and they'd be like, Scott, we just talked about that. Um, and I relied on my memory was so good, I relied on it too much maybe. So when I started to have some decline, it became noticeable to me. For instance, when I was sitting in a meeting, I would take notes just by putting like a 2 or 3 words, for something. It's just enough to jog my memory. When I looked at it after the meeting and to get, okay, I got to do that. And I was getting to the point where after a meeting, a day or two later, I'd be going through my mo notes and I'd be scratching my head saying, hmm, what exactly did what I wrote, what did that mean? So I started noticing that. And again, you know, people I work with sort of noticed, but no, nothing major. They weren't concerned. They, just thought, he's getting older. But that then eventually led me to go back to the neurologist, because it was bothering me, feeling that I wasn't at the top of my game. Um, that time we went through the whole series of tests, including an MRI and the spinal fluid test, which is, one of the confirmations of whether you have Alzheimer's or not. And that turned out that it was positive for Alzheimer's disease.
Mhm. And Kris, were you noticing things at this time, or were they?
When he had first gone to the neurologist in the beginning, it was more what he was noticing. I would notice, or he would point out, while I walked in the room and I needed to do something and I forgot what it is. And it's like, well, I do that all the time. So I guess at that stage, I didn't think there was really anything wrong. But as a couple years went by, I did start to notice different things that were just uncharacteristic for Scott.
And Scott, your parents had Alzheimer's, is that correct?
My mother did, and her father, so my father-in-law, but my mother had it.
Okay. So you yourself helped your mother and had some understanding of that.
Yeah, a little bit. She was, older
Later.
Later, so we cared for her for what, about 6 months to a year.
Well, she stayed with us for
Yeah.
just under a year, and then
Had to go into nursing home, and but yeah, that was really eye-opening, when she came to live with us, because she was the sweetest woman you could ever meet. I mean, I never, ever, ever heard her curse. And, when she was in the later stages of Alzheimer's, I mean, she sounded like a sailor at times. I mean, I would just like, you know, where did this come from? So it was shocking to see how it changes someone's personality. Um, and then, she declined fairly rapidly. And shortly after she passed away, her dad, who was a police officer, detective, he had to retire because of issues he was having. And he declined very quickly
Very
after he
fast.
stopped working.
And so what treatment are you getting today?
So I take Leqembi.
So,
It's an infusion that I get every 2 weeks. It'll be going except after a certain amount of time, you go to one a month instead of two a month. So I'm coming up on that, and then shortly, which will be
couple months.
a little easier. I don't have to, drive 45 minutes to the infusion center, twice a month, just once a month.
And it's an hour infusion. So
And has that any how's the feeling of taking that drug? Can you tell whether it's difficult to tell its effects, right?
It is difficult to tell, but I truly believe it's working. Um, I mean, for one, every time I go to the neurologist, I do a cognitive test score, or a cognitive test in the office. And up until my last visit, I got the exact same score every time. And this last visit, because I was a little bummed that I went down a point, he said, I made it a little harder on you this time. So,
he changed it a little.
yeah, he changed it up a little bit. So that just, is what Leqembi is supposed to do. It's supposed to slow the progression down. So going 18 months with no decline based on the test scores, and then maybe just starting to go down, in my belief, it's doing what the drug's supposed to do, is slowly decline down.
And we actually had we can quantify it with actual results. Before he started Leqembi, about 2 months before he had started the injections or infusions, he did all the finances, which, just balancing everything in a spreadsheet, or,
Yeah, taxes, anything to do with the finances.
and
I did.
he was having trouble with it. So I'd come in and help. And then he gave up and he just said, I can't do it anymore. So which was fine. I have a finance background, so it was easy to take it over, but it was heartbreaking for him. And it was February. He started the infusions on December 18th in 23. And by mid-February, he wanted to try and do it again. And he's been doing it ever since. So.
Okay. And has it affected your training for the half marathons? Yeah.
No, no, not at all. I mean, in the beginning, the first few days after an infusion, I was kind of sleepy and tired. So, I mean, that may have impacted, a tiny bit, but not anything significant. That would last, a few days. But I mean, for the past 6, 9 months, doesn't bother me at all.
So physically, since your diagnosis, you've been able to keep up the same pace as your training.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And what about your training? What do you got coming up in those races? Are you still going to compete?
Yes. The interesting thing about an Ironman or even marathons, you have the pros, you have the age groupers that are competing as amateurs, and then you have people that their goal is just to beat their time or finish. And that's the category I fall into. I'm just I don't have the body and build and the whatever comes along to be able to go the speeds that the serious the competitive athletes do in triathlon. It's mind-boggling what they do on the bike and the run and the swim. So it's just really it's a matter of endurance. And so I'm basically racing myself. The goal is to finish.
And now you're involved with Alzheimer's groups, is that right? And also
Yes.
representing them in the runs. Tell me about that.
Yes. I got hooked up with the Alzheimer's Association by a gentleman named Dan Jaworski. He does Ironmans. When I got diagnosed, probably within the first couple of days after diagnosis, I Googled Ironman and Alzheimer's, and Dan Jaworski's name popped up. So I reached out to him. He was on vacation. He got back from vacation, and I was on a business trip in Europe. So 2 months later, we finally talked on the phone. It was great, especially at that time, early onset was still not that recognized, it wasn't as you hear more about it now. So he basically said, "Have you talked to the Alzheimer's Association? They're a great source." And I was like, "I have a disease that can't be cured. How can they possibly help me?" I mean, and he was like, "I'm going to call someone and they'll reach out to you." And basically, a week or two went by and I got a phone call and just kind of talked. And then the next thing I knew, I was giving speeches and going here and going there. And, it was really, I don't want to say inspiring is not the right word, but it made me feel good that you could talk to people because it's a topic that people don't really like to talk about. I mean, it's kind of one of those a lot of people just say stay quiet about. So to be able to actually speak publicly, go to see our senators and congressmen and do all those things, it kind of gives me a purpose still.
Do you find an extra purpose when you're running now? I mean, to almost represent a community too?
I do. And I have a story about that. My last full Ironman in Texas, the wind was absolutely brutal. It was sustained at 35 and gusting to 42. It was miserable. And there was a point where I stopped at an aid station. There was a bunch of people a lot younger than me that were just giving up. They're waiting for the van to come pick them up. And I'm sitting there going, these guys are 20 years younger than me and they're going to give up. How am I going to finish? And then, I kind of remember back to what got me through life, from my dad's, his is don't give up as long as you try your best. That's all that matters. So I just got on my bike and started pedaling. And, I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking about all the people at the Alzheimer's Association that have raised money and all the awareness they've done and all the publicity. And I'm like, well, this is going to look really bad if I don't even finish the race. And that gave me the motivation to just keep pushing on, and get through it and finish it.
Do you hear those words just in your daily life from your father too, about persevering when you may get frustrated in things and not remembering things?
Yeah, I do. I do. I mean, I think our brains were sort of similar. So I know, he would have been frustrated himself. But the always give your best. And if whatever else happens doesn't matter. That's how I've lived my life.
Mhm. We've got a question from Anna, a listener, and it's kind of a clarification. She wanted to know what med was infused. I think you mentioned it, but she just wanted a clarification on.
Leqembi.
Also called lecanemab.
Yeah, lecanemab is the pharmaceutical name. Leqembi is the brand name.
Mhm. And have you had any side effects at all so far?
I have not, other than just the fatigue. I mean, that was one of the first hurdles we had to go through, is because it got released, or FDA approval, right about the time I was diagnosed. But when you read that there was a lot of doomsday about, it causes death, it causes strokes, and you're kind of like, well, that doesn't sound very appealing. But after talking to several people, and I mean, I decided to give it a shot. And the first couple infusions were, a little nerve-wracking, but I mean, I didn't have any issues at all. So.
Okay. And you worked in the aviation industry too. Tell me about that and how was that impacted by your diagnosis?
Well, the main impact was just the fact that,
And tell us what you were doing, though. It's very interesting what you were
okay.
doing.
Yes. So I spent most of my career, working on stealth technology. It's everybody's aircraft's commonly thought of, but literally the military has a stealth version of everything, down to rifles, to soldiers' helmets, to anything you don't want a radar to be able to pick up. And what I sort of did was, let's just, you build a stealth airplane. How do you know it's stealth? You don't want to learn when you're flying over the enemy and you look like, Santa Claus coming in with Rudolph. So I was involved in the equipment and test facilities that actually test the airplane, the missile, the ship, the tank, whatever, to make sure that it is actually, you know, the stealth technology is doing its job effectively, and nobody gets a surprise.
Mhm. And so, when you got the diagnosis, did you continue working some?
I did. I worked, what, probably another year and a half.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just retired this year.
It's retired this year. Okay. Um, Another interesting tidbit from your life when we look on your resume is that you started out this whole sort of adventurous spirit by getting into go-kart racing. And that's explain what that is. People might think it's go to the local Malibu track and for a birthday party, but it's a little more intense than that, right?
Right. Yeah. So there's two types of go-karting. One they call sprint track, and that's a smaller sort of road style course track. very common. Most big city areas are going to have a track like that. Um, and ranging from, 5-year-olds to 60-year-olds racing. And then there's a step above that where you're racing on regular automobile racetracks, Daytona, Mid-Ohio, Watkins Glen, for people that recognize any of those, major racetracks. I mean, you're racing at the same tracks that Indy cars racing on, NASCAR's racing on. And the speeds range, there's several different classes. And the speeds range probably in the top speed from 100 miles an hour to 150 to 160 miles an hour. So there's a lot of tracks we would race at, especially the tighter tracks, where the carts actually go faster than a race car does because it's so light. In a very light vehicle, you can brake in a lot shorter distance than you can in a 3,000-pound car, and you can accelerate a lot faster too. So a lot of people were surprised that carts are on a large track are typically the same speed or faster than.
And you're doing this at starting at around 25 years old, right? So this is
Yeah,
not, I mean, you're not starting as some of these kids 10-year-old, but you're
right.
with a goal to potentially become professional, right?
Well, that was my hope, but I mean, I was already starting too late, and the bigger one was I didn't, even with the age, had I had the right financing, I could have went down that path, but I was working full time, had kids, I mean, I don't come from a wealthy family, so
But that moved you into, oddly enough, Ironman racing, is that right?
yes, yeah, yes, it
What's
did.
the transition there? Okay.
Well, I think I was bored when I stopped racing, and had to do something, and uh, I started running just to get in shape, and then for some reason we were at Hilton Head, and uh, I was running, around the neighborhood, and I saw a sign for a half marathon coming up in Hilton Head like in 6 months or something, and I'm like, I can run 5 miles. Maybe I can do that. So that was what started me down that path. I my first race was a uh, half marathon, and then I did a full, and then that's when I kind of switched over into the triathlons, and then worked my way up to the Ironman races.
And Kris, how are you involved in this training, this intense training, adventurous lifestyle that he has to deal with constantly, and now with the challenge of Alzheimer's? Are you providing some extra care in the training to make sure that everything's going right, or is he pretty much just go on his own?
Well, I've always been basically his support crew.
Yes.
So I mean, what he does is, in my eyes, impossible. I don't know how he does it, but um, the only thing that I'd say that I help additionally with now is just making sure he doesn't stress over things that he thinks that he's forgetting.
Yep.
Because sometimes he thinks he's forgetting things when he's not. So stress is probably his biggest enemy.
Yep.
But honestly, the training is very therapeutic for him. He's much happier if he's training every single day. He actually is a little anxious on the one day a week that he doesn't train. So, but I don't provide really much other than just support.
Well, her job starts after the race is over, because in an Ironman, when you stop, your body finally shuts down basically, and everything starts cramping, and so she helps get me through the that part of it, feeding me and giving me fluids, and when something cramps, working the cramp out.
Become a masseuse.
Any final words that you can offer to our audience? Because what you do is, beyond what the normal human does. And you're really inspiring people to, challenge themselves in whatever they can do, whether it's, not necessarily having to run an Ironman, but any words of advice that you can offer for people going through this battle too.
So I think the main thing is if you suspect you have Alzheimer's or some form of dementia, don't wait. And don't, especially if you're younger, doctors tend to, sort of push it off. Get checked out, go to a neurologist get second opinions because we now, for the first time, have a treatment that actually slows the disease. It's not a cure, but it slows the disease. So the way I look at it, if I get an extra 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, what's the price tag on that? It's priceless. So the sooner you get started, the better.
Okay. Well, Scott and Kris, thank you so much for joining us and being so open and honest about your struggles and triumphs, and perhaps most of all, being there to inspire others on your journey. Thanks to our audience for tuning in. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter on beingpatient.com, where we'll keep you up to date on all the upcoming talks. See you next time.